So let me get us started. Those of you who are watching online now, let me introduce you, probably for the first time ever, to Benjamin Smith, who is our prospective associate pastor at First Baptist Church of Rochester. He will be here on July 17th and 18th for a series of events, meet and greets, opportunities to meet him and get to know him. Again, July 17th and 18th. That schedule is not entirely finalized at the time of this recording, but it will be available online. You can go to rochesterfbc.org/AP candidate. And you can find the schedule and a lot of other information about Benjamin. A little bit of his bio is there, and some other information that you'll find valuable. What we're doing right now is just sitting down for a conversation, just another way for you all online to listen in to a conversation between Benjamin and I. We have talked a little bit about the topics that we want to chat about, but neither of us know. Well, I guess that's not true. We've had a few conversations in the past, so some of the things we're going to talk about, I already kind of know what we'll say. This is not a scripted conversation, is what I'm trying to point out. And we are just looking forward to chatting and having you over here as a way to get to know Benjamin a little bit, even before he's here. So check out that website. And if you have First Baptist people, if you have questions that you would like to ask me about this process, or questions that you want to address Benjamin, for one thing, you'll have an opportunity when he's here to ask questions. But you're also welcome to send those to me via email or whenever you see me at church or whatever, and we'll start finding answers to questions. And we're looking forward to getting to know Benjamin a little bit more. So Benjamin, welcome.
Thanks. Glad to be here, Brent.
It's good to have you. I am really, really excited about your coming to preach in view of a call, to be here for a candidating weekend soon, and prospectively, is that a word? Prospectively?
It is now.
Coming to be our associate pastor. I'm getting excited about working with you and excited about the skills and the ideas and the presence that you bring to ministry, being a part of our life and family of faith here at First Baptist. So let me start in a really general place, pick the conversation off. Here's the question. Who are you? Tell us in the most general sense about yourself.
Yeah, so to answer a really big question in a quick way, I grew up in Jackson, Mississippi. I lived there until I was 21 years old-ish. I have always had a heart for the church. I've always been really moved by meeting for worship. I was always that nerdy kid who would actually listen to the sermon growing up. And I knew that was a bad sign from a young age. Yeah. But I think that part of who I am eventually led me to seminary. And some of you guys know, some of you may not know yet, I went to seminary at Wake Forest in North Carolina, graduated this past summer, actually. So yeah, my spiritual journey sort of started when I was a kid, being that sort of geeky kid who was really interested in the sermons, and then ended, I don't know, maybe not ended, but I sort of brought me to where I am now and having finished seminary, and I'm looking towards what's next. And I'm happy to be looking towards what's next with you guys. A little more about who I am. I love outdoorsy things. I love biking. I love hiking. Swimming is my favorite. I love doing that. Love traveling, spending time with friends and family and everything in between. So that's a little bit about who I am right there.
I love that you touch a bit on your having begun to sense an interest in the church from a pretty young age, you would say. Yeah,
probably like 10, 11, something around that age.
So you must have grown up then in the church. You tell me about what church was like. You mentioned, being the nerd that listened to the sermons, which as a preacher, I thank you, and as a kid who also listened to the sermons, uh, yeah, I get it. But what was church like for you?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brent. So I grew up in a church, just to get technical, that was affiliated with the Alliance of Baptists. And so generally what that means, with some exceptions, is that worship follows the liturgical calendar. Um, Women are a central part of worship in most Alliance of Baptist churches. And worship tends to sort of draw from the Anglican tradition in a lot of ways, deeply rooted in the Baptist tradition too in other ways. Sometimes they come from more evangelical worship styles. That wasn't necessarily the case with mine. So for me, worship at the church that I grew up was thoughtful. It was quiet in a way that I think is very hard for a lot of kids to tune into. It had a strong emphasis on the table and on communion. And that was really interesting to me as a kid. I really appreciated the multisensory component of worship in that way. From the organ, which kind of rattled the pews, right? Which was interesting and stimulating to a distraction-prone kid like me, to being able to walk up and take communion as opposed to receiving it. I know a lot of different Baptist churches do it differently. To just being able to pass the peace and touch hands with people. All of these things resonated with me as a kid, and I always had worship being a very embodied experience. And to me, that's something I'm passionate about now, letting worship be something that we experience as a bodily invitation, right? A way to show up on Sunday mornings using our bodies as well as our brains, right? And our hearts. So to me, that's something that's a non-negotiable in worship. I have to sort of feel and touch the presence of Christ, and sometimes even smell it, right? Sometimes you smell the bread, you smell the grape juice. Some churches, you smell the incense. We don't really do that as Baptists, but maybe one day, you never know.
Did you ever play church when you were a kid?
Kind of. I played pastor officiating a funeral for one bird and one lizard. I think maybe an earthworm too at some point. But if you ask any of my like family members who remember when I was a kid, they would tell me that I would officiate funerals for like dead animals that I found. And I think maybe also an earthworm, which I think I just mentioned. So I would definitely do that. And I think that is probably equally disturbing as it was a promise that, or a sign that I was going to go and do something like related to caregiving and faith and ministry as an adult.
Absolutely. That's I was in my family. I was a 5-year-old preacher. Stood at
Oh, no way.
a little kids table that my grandfather made for us to eat on, and offered sermons. I think I was a bit more hellfire and brimstone back there than I tried. That's all right. So are there thoughts and ideas? Well, I should preface this by saying, for anyone who might not know, a big part of your role at First Baptist will be to work with our children and their families in helping develop and implement the ministries and the faith formation opportunities of our youngest worshipers. Are there things from that kind of childhood, growing up in church and being very sort of aware, maybe even more so aware than most? We have some of those kids in our congregation, by the way, who are paying attention to everything,
Good.
that I think you're going to enjoy getting to know. But are there things from that period of time in your life that you think come forward into ministry now?
Yeah. Just off the top of my head, I mentioned being kind of a busybody kid, right? Kind of a distractible kid. Um, to me, what I hear in distraction-prone kids is that just listening is not enough in worship, right? Showing up and just seeing Christian life happen, and it's being something that you're supposed to watch or see your parents do, but you're supposed to be quiet during. It didn't jive with me, and it doesn't jive with me now. Maybe it worked for some people, it didn't work for me. And so the experience of being able to touch the communion bread as a kid, we were an open fellowship where everybody could come to the communion table. The experience of being able to touch the bread, to sort of clasp the chalice, was really special to me in that sense. the church that I grew up in also had programming for kids where we would we would use different like substances like sand. And I remember one programming, we would practice passing sand to one another in cups, which sounds like a crazy idea, but it was all about just experiencing prayer embodied and what it means to, give part of what you have, in this case, sand being the symbolic, object, to your neighbors. And that's so much more meaningful to me than sitting and listening to children's programming. And while I think that, it can be really good and special to sit and listen and to learn that skill when you're young, because it's something that even as an adult, I still struggle with. But while I think that's really important, I was just so lucky to have programming that involved all of who I was, from my body to my brain, from my head to my heart, being able to plug in that way and not only experience worship as more embodied, but also lead in worship too sometimes. I would read scripture in worship as a kid every once in a while. This is funny now, but one of the most terrifying experiences I've had in worship is being asked to pass the communion plate when I was like 9. And that was so scary. I remember the night before, I was afraid I was going to mess it up. I remember thinking, like, how do I do it? I do row 1 and then row 3 and then row 5. And then I was just a nervous mess all the way up there. And then, it didn't go great. I messed it up a little bit. And that's okay. I don't think that was the point. But what the point was that I was up and I was moving in worship and I was actively being a member of Christ's body in community. And I was only 9. And to me, that type of membership and that type of embodiment is really, really important. And that really informs my ministry today.
Those are impactful moments. I was sort of parallel processing with you there. I also, at a young age in my church, was asked to help serving communion, Lord's Supper, we called it. And the fact that you pass every other row made absolutely no sense to me then.
None.
Kind of doesn't make sense to me now, but I think I've got a handle on it. But I do. I resonate with what you're saying. You do gain as a child a sense of you may not fully grasp all of the propositions that come with faith, but you get a sense of what's happening in this place and among these people and why it's important. So thanks for allowing me the opportunity to recall those things and process them with you. What kind of making a slight shift now, just thinking about who you are now, what are the things in life, in ministry, that just give you a sense of being alive?
Another big question. I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is the feeling that I get being invited into people's lives. Something that I think is unique about being in a caregiving profession, and then specifically being a minister, right? Being a pastor, is often you're going to be there for some really hard times in people's lives and some really amazing times in people's lives. And to me, being able to be the person who receives that trust, it fills me with life and it fills me with joy. I think when somebody invites another person into a really hard or a really amazing time in your life, I think there's a lot of Christ present in that invitation. And I love being in those parts of people's lives. I also think the day-to-day part of ministry and the day-to-day activity of the church is also some of the most amazing. We have certain days that stand out to us, like special holy days like Easter and Christmas, or like really amazing worship services. And then on the other hand, deaths and funerals and bad news and things like that. And we can all grow really close to one another in those moments too. But I also really love your average ordinary Sunday morning or your average Wednesday night, where nothing memorable necessarily happens, but the community is there and the community comes together and everybody's getting to know one another even more, because that process never ends in ministry in my experience. I also really come alive in preaching. I think all of us have work to do in the part of our jobs that mean a lot to us. But I also think that being able to articulate what I think and being able to explore a text with community and with the accountability of other people who help me get it right and who help me interpret things that we read in the Bible as a community with compassion and tenderness and with stewardship is a really good thing that I not only need, but I also just have a lot of fun when I do it. I also just love conversations in the narthex with people. I love just having a chat with folks. I love it when church members just call me and we don't really talk about much because maybe we were supposed to talk about something. We didn't get around to it because we had a nice time. So again, it's those ordinary moments I love. Saying hello to somebody in passing, getting to know somebody better over coffee, swinging by somebody's house to drop something off and we end up having a good conversation. All of those things are really meaningful to me.
There's a lot for us to get to know about you, but one thing that is really important at First Baptist, or at least a thing that we try really hard to make really important, is the notion of a wide welcome inclusion of all people. All means all. And we can break that down into a number of different categories. First Baptist is a welcoming and affirming church, meaning welcoming and affirming of people of all identities across gender and sexual and attractional identities. But we mean even more than that.
Absolutely.
We try to welcome people from all walks of life, all perspectives, even when that's difficult to do. That doesn't mean we're experts at that. It just means we're trying to become experts at that. How do you sense that you will fit in a congregation that is at least setting that idea before us?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brent. I'm sort of thinking in two terms right now. The first term is that a church that is welcoming and affirming of all folks is not only a church that I would love to be a part of and hope to, but it also indicates something bigger about the church, because I think behind every public embrace that a church embodies is a belief. And FBCR, it sounds like the core belief behind that is that every person is a child of God. So to me, stances or affirmations, right, or attitudes or postures, whatever language we want to use, are not the end goal. They're sort of the fruit of the belief that binds the community together. And from my perspective, even though I don't know you guys well yet, is that everyone is a child of God is the belief that binds you guys together. With that being said, I hear and celebrate your welcoming and affirming status, particularly as an LGBTQ person myself. Excuse me. I think it's not only important that I share this mission with a church, right? This vision for how God's reality on earth should be embodied, but that I also be treated as an equal in the way that I plan to treat all of you as equals, right? It's very important. And I hear and celebrate your stance. I think all relationships in congregational life are reciprocal, right? I think we look out for one another, and I think it matters that everybody be on the same page. And so I see myself fitting in really well. And I see you guys having paved the way for years and years before my arrival and before Brent's arrival.
That's so well said. It makes me wish that we had an opening on our staff for someone and that you were willing to come to Oh, wait.
What are the odds?
For you. For you. You actually had a chance to visit Rochester recently.
Yes.
Most of the people watching this right now were blissfully unaware of your presence in Rochester as we quickly settled around the city to get to know Rochester a little bit. For you to get to know Rochester a little bit. Famously, I wanted to spend a little time with Benjamin while he was here and knew that he enjoyed outdoors. So I went to take him for a hike, but instead of doing one hike, we thought we would do little snippets of a couple of hikes around. And I thought Mount Hope Cemetery would be a good place to go for a little bit of a walk, and then we'd go do some trail hiking. I completely lost track of time. And that's how it came to pass that Benjamin came to Rochester and I took him only to Mount Hope Cemetery.
And I didn't think anything of it is the other half of the story.
That's good. That's good news. I didn't mean to bring you here, but the search committee and I got to spend some time with you and show you around and have good conversation. What did you think of Rochester while you were here?
Before I answer that question, I had no clue what Rochester, what it was not on my radar until I started talking to you guys. Like I knew it was in Western New York. I knew it was kind of close to Buffalo. That's all I knew. I kind of knew about like the proximity to the lake. You know, I knew little things like that, but I couldn't tell you one person who I knew from like Rochester. I couldn't tell you like anything. So I started doing some research on Rochester, learned I have a friend who grew up in Greece, which I didn't know, like a seminary, not a close friend, but a seminary like acquaintance, which is pretty cool. And so putting that together, reading some cool stuff about Rochester, I had the trip coming up in like a week or so, and I was ready to experience the city. And I loved it. The city was really pretty. It's familiar in a lot of ways as somebody who grew up in a city about the size of Rochester. And it's also unfamiliar and new and exciting to me as somebody who just has not spent much time in a place like New York. People I found were really friendly. I've lived in a couple of big cities like Atlanta and Austin. And when I was a college student, I spent summers in Chicago. And people, you know, talking to folks in lines at the grocery store is not really a big thing in those three places. I think somebody chatted with me in all the places, like a stranger in all of the places that I went with the search committee. I don't know how normal that is. Maybe I looked like I wasn't from Rochester. Maybe I looked like I was being shown around, but I found people just beyond friendly and really nice. The food was really good. I went to a lot of good restaurants. I liked the food a lot. And the canal, I was sort of thinking the canal was going to be kind of industrial, just sort of, I don't know why I thought that. It was one of my favorite parts of the city. I also thought Rochester was sort of a nice mix of urban and kind of rural, kind of countryside, which was really, really nice. I went to go, I forgot the name of the ice cream place that we went. The search committee took me to get ice cream. And that part of Rochester was very different, in a good way, very different from like driving through downtown. You would almost, you know, they almost felt like two cities. And I guess they were. I think we were in Fairport, weren't we, for ice cream?
Right. That
Okay.
was a Moonlight Creamery. They're not a corporate sponsor, but they should be. Moonlight Creamery in Fairport, which is, for better or for worse, about a 3-minute walk from my house.
For better. So yeah, all that's to say, I think Rochester is a city that sort of is like a Rubik's Cube, right? Lots of different sides to it. Maybe if you crave something a little more urban and, you know, like something you'd find in a bigger city, you can sort of carve out a life for yourself like that in Rochester. Or if you want to live in the woods, I think you can make that happen in Rochester too. So I loved it. Rochester seems to fit a whole lot of different lifestyles and interests, and I'm hoping to get a chance to soak the city up soon.
Absolutely. You mentioned Austin, having
Yes.
been in multiple places, including Austin. This is an interesting place for me to point out that I did not know Benjamin before this search. Benjamin didn't know me, but lo and behold, you hear him speak of Austin. You all know that I came from Austin immediately before this. Benjamin actually served in an intern sort of role at a church where I served in an interim role a few years ago, and where I was a member for a few years at University Baptist Church in Austin. So it was fun for us to have that sort of small world connection there. But you also mentioned Jackson in Mississippi, where you're from,
Yep.
and where you currently are, I believe.
Yeah, currently I'm here. Yeah, after seminary, I came back and I'm spending time with friends and family here. I've been working at a nonprofit here called Stewpot that addresses homelessness and helps folks who are going through homelessness get things like social security cards so that they can apply for programs like food stamps that otherwise they wouldn't have access to. Most of you guys might imagine that Jackson is super hot. It's always humid. It's always hot. Even in December, it can get up to like 80 or something. And so one of the ministries that Stewpot sort of embodies, it's an interfaith ministry, mostly Christian, but interfaith ultimately, is it just helps folks get out of the sun. In a place like Rochester, I imagine you want to focus on warming up folks who don't have a place to stay. In a place like Jackson, you need to cool them down. Homeless people experience really disproportionately high rates of heat stroke and fatal dehydration and heat exhaustion here, especially when you're walking around on asphalt and you don't have access to water. You maybe can't find a public bathroom. A place like Stewpot really seeks just get folks inside, let them sit in the shade, get some water, and then if they need to, work on getting documentation they need so that they can sort of transition into a stable housing arrangement. So I've been working there. We've got a community garden too that folks enjoy working in, and it's teaching me a lot about gardening too.
Beautiful. You're also being somewhat humble, and leave it to me to break down humility. A part of the ministry where you're spending some time serving right now, at another point in your life, you helped start that ministry, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I work, so Stewpot again is the name of the organization. And right now I'm working for the day shelter. We also have a what we call a clothing closet, which helps folks once a month get clothing that they need that otherwise they wouldn't have. And so I started that ministry about 4 years ago when I was working at Stewpot for the first time. And just through donations and volunteer efforts and through a lot of cleaning and renovating an old building, we set up what I think now is a permanent free clothing store that's fully based on volunteer staffing and donations of old clothes from like churches and synagogues and schools and like Goodwills and things like that. And we've got a lot of clothing in the back, and we've always got a set of volunteers who just come every day and sort for hours. And every day, probably 30 to 40 people come in looking for clothes, which to me is crazy. You never know when you set up something, how many people are going to respond. And it really exposes a need in town that's very humbling and good for folks to be aware of.
Absolutely. It reminds me a bit of a ministry that we have here in Rochester that our congregation supports called Cameron Community Ministries. That it's not an exact corollary to the Stewpot, but has some overlap in what they do. So good to hear that, and good for you for being a part of the genesis of something so important for so many people. I want to ask you one more question, but before we do that, I want to remind everybody that there's no chance we're going to cover all the ground that we'd like to cover in this one conversation, but you will have opportunities to meet Benjamin on July 17th, a Saturday, and on July 18th, that Sunday. He'll also be with us in worship on July 18th. He'll be preaching the sermon that morning and offering the children's sermon and doing some other parts of the service so that we can see him in worship, which I'm tremendously excited about being a part of. So you can get the schedule and all of the other information that you need, and even read a little bit more about Benjamin at rochesterfbc.org/AP candidate. You can find all of that information there. But then I thought that I would just close appropriately enough, Benjamin, by asking, what is it that you're most excited about in coming to Rochester, being a part of the Rochester community and the First Baptist community?
Lots of things. One of which is a garbage plate, by the way. I need somebody to show me a garbage plate, and I've read about it, so let me know if you want to be that person. But on a more serious note, I'm looking forward to getting to know you guys. I love to get to know people. I just love building relationships with folks. I love hearing about where folks are coming from, things that are important to them, who's in their family, where they've come from, what kind of things they do, and what brings them alive. And I really want to get to know this about all of you guys. I also want to get to know Rochester. Seems like it's got a lot to offer. New York State seems to have a bunch to offer. I want to get into some hiking. I want to get into some cool places to bike, get to know the canal. And again, just to reiterate what I've said, I want to get to know you guys too. I want to get to know y'all, and I want to get to know your city. And I think I'll definitely be able to do that.
You will definitely have opportunities for that. We're looking forward to having you here for a visit for a candidating weekend, again, July 17th and 18th. Plenty of opportunities to meet Benjamin. More details on that at rochesterfbc.org/AP candidate. Benjamin, thank you. This has been enjoyable. I'm looking forward to chatting with you more whenever you're here. But thanks for these few moments we spent together.
Yeah, thanks, Brent.